For me, coming to grips with having a psychotic condition didn't quite work like flicking a switch. It was more like a pendulum between a fully delusional state and one where I could see my illness for what it was. Most of my first week in psychiatric hospital was spent at the delusional end of the spectrum, which manifested itself as a strong conviction that I was a fraud. I remember writing a note and handing it to one of the nurses because I was too ashamed to tell them myself. It basically said I had orchestrated my admission so that I could prey on vulnerable inpatients. I expected to be taken away and locked up, never to see my family or friends again. I recall my eldest brother Matthew phoning in to see how I was doing. Afterwards, I asked my dad to suggest he doesn't call again because I believed I was somehow causing harm to him, his wife and child simply by having a normal conversation with him over the phone. I then shared with my dad that I was a fraud and not really ill. Just like the nurse a few days before, he gently acknowledged my point of view and said that for now, hospital was the best place for me to be. Within a week of my hospital admission, my doctor put the pieces together. She said I was experiencing a double whammy of obsessive thoughts and severe depression that was causing the delusions. She made a diagnosis of bipolar disorder type 1 and obsessive-compulsive disorder. I don't remember what my initial reaction was, but a day or two later I was reading a pamphlet about bipolar disorder and the back cover of a book about OCD. As I read the content, it was like looking in a mirror. I began to understand the past 3 years of my life in an entirely new light. That same evening, my brother Henry came to visit and we chewed over the diagnosis of bipolar, and I shared with him about reading the pamphlet. He said he also had been doing some reading and had wondered whether there had been something going wrong with how my brain had been interacting with my conscience. As is often the case in life, it took a relational moment like this one to cement in my own mind that I had indeed been suffering quite severely from a mental illness. After Henry left, I had a strong feeling of gratitude and I prayed with a clear mind for the first time in months, knowing that my recovery was now underway. The next breakthrough moment happened a few days later. I had been learning about the concept of mindfulness, which had been explained to me in some of the group therapy sessions. I sat down to practice a simple exercise which involved focusing on my senses. I trained my attention on a series of 5 different objects in my field of vision, then 5 sounds to my ears, then 5 parts of my body, and cycled through the pattern again and again. It had a remarkable circuit-breaking effect on my obsessive thoughts. Through doing this exercise and others like it, I began to regain my sanity because I was training my mind to be fully in the present, something it had not done for months or perhaps even years. I liken the start of my recovery to the launch of a space shuttle. Tremendous amounts of energy go into getting it off the ground and its many parts need to be working together. To continue with the space image, in the late 1970s, NASA launched the space probe Voyager into the solar system to take pictures of the outer-lying planets. To achieve the mission, it had a certain amount of power it could direct into changing course, but it needed to harness the gravity of the planets it visited along the way. They worked as a slingshot to propel the probe from planet to planet, and then into outer space where it continues its interstellar mission to this day. We humans are not so different. We all need to leverage power external to ourselves to get where we want to go in life's journey. The makeup of these power sources may differ according to one's personality and needs, but they all apply to the 3 elements of body, mind, and spirit that form my framework for a successful recovery. It can be daunting to know exactly where to start when embarking on a recovery, but I think it's a case of keeping it simple and doing things one step at a time. Sitting in my hospital room doing the mindfulness exercise, I realized that my starting point was to do whatever was necessary to maintain a stable mood. Everything else came second.